Pandora Syndrome. Written by April Walleen. Read by April Walleen. Directed and recorded by Andreas Gallego. Chapter 7. Undead and Unemployed. A screeching roused me from my memories. I listened. It was more of a cackle than a screech. A familiar one, too. The annoying laugh of a patron at the coffee house above me. I wanted to yell for her to shut up. But no, I was stuck in my cement grave, unable to die, or even remain unconscious for long as it seemed. All I could do was try and forget about where I was. I thought back on life, and what it was like to move freely. I'd wasted so much time taking my freedom, my friends, and especially Remy for granted. I should have been trying to figure out a career or something else adults usually did. But I hadn't. I inwardly cringed as I thought back on my foolishly spent afterlife. It had been a little over a year since the big change, and I'd become a halfway decent vampire. I could feed on my own now and function amongst humans without attracting the attention of hunters. I still hadn't heard anything about that incident with the werewolves. Thank God for small favors. When it came to my necro powers, I was moving right along with my ability to raise small mammals from the dead. Mucifer was doing well, and living quite happily on the rodents living beneath Remy's house. I'd been too afraid to raise anything larger. Yeah, Jack had turned out pretty well, but that horrifying picture book of undead creatures still scarred my memory. Aside from my fear of accidentally raising some horrifying monster, my main problem was the inability to locate decent research material. Remy had also come up empty-handed. The books in the downtown library had only been helpful in showing me what not to do. The little black book of death had completely vanished again. When I'd asked Remy about it, he said he'd never seen such a book in his library. That definitely confirmed my theory that it was magic. But how did I conjure it up again? Remy had also been on the lookout for a necromancer to help train me. Unfortunately, it was a rarefied profession, and he couldn't find anyone he'd trust. As for the matter of my having been shot outside the Viper Room, now that I was a fully capable vampire, both Remy and I had been searching for the person who'd killed me. After coming up completely empty-handed, Remy decided that the perpetrator must have gone into hiding, though he warned me to keep my guard up. I was starting to wonder if it had just been a random robbery gone wrong after all, but Remy was convinced otherwise. I'd settled into a comfortable lull at my brother's, and didn't leave the house except to feed, see Mom, or visit with Remy. I was out of vampire basic training, and had no idea what to do with myself. Jack was doing well professionally, since he could still function outside in daylight hours. However, over the last year, Jack had developed some interesting zombie tics. He'd started walking in his sleep, which was super scary because when he's asleep, he starts deteriorating. I called it Undead Fiend mode. When Jack is in UFM, he isn't too smart. Ravenous and scary, but not smart. Luckily, he usually only sleepwalked when he was working and hadn't had quite enough to eat during the day. Jack was harmless enough, though, as he usually just ambled to the fridge and back. Once, however, I woke up to Jack nibbling on my leg. He got one bite in, groaned, and quickly spat out a hunk of my skin. Apparently vampire flesh didn't taste too good. My calf muscle grew back quickly, but it was still unnerving, and it hurt like hell. A couple times I'd even found Jack outside gnawing on a dead raccoon or squirrel. As a solution, we decided that he should lock his door at night. Apparently zombie brains can't comprehend deadbolts. Remy even donated a mini-fridge to the cause so he could eat in his room whenever the urge overtook him. Once we did this, there wasn't much of a problem, though I still thought it was good that none of his one-night stands ever slept over. As for my friend Rosetta, she hadn't spoken to me since I told her about my little change. I hadn't pushed her, but I kept hoping to get a call from her. Sadly, it never came. It broke my heart, but I would give her the time she needed. I could wait. I sat at my brother's playing Miss Pac-Man on my brand new Atari 5200. It was a major staple in the wasting of my afterlife. I was working steadily towards the high score, just one level away from beating my record, when Jack came trudging into the living room. "Surprised just where I left you," he commented dryly. "Shh," I hissed at him. "I'm about to kick the ever-loving crap out of these ghosts." "Does Romulus know how you spend your time away from him?" "What he doesn't know won't hurt him. I replied distractedly. Rummy was okay with moving pictures, but video games seemed beyond his comprehension. Here's a novel idea, Jack continued. Why don't you try getting a job? Gee, thanks, Mom, I replied, masterfully navigating my controller. I thought we established that you were the successful one, leaving me to fill the slacker role. I'd been trying to find a way to fill my time, but all the night jobs I'd seen were less than desirable. My attention wasn't actually to be a waste of space. I just didn't know what else to do with myself. Just then, Miss Pac-Man chomped on the large white dot, turning the ghosts blue and ready for consumption. I got it! I yelled in excitement. I'm starting to worry about you, Jack continued, hovering over me. Why did he have to pick now to get all big brotherly on me? We've been undead or whatever for a while now. You know it's safe for us to function among the rest of the population. As long as we stay fed, we're not a menace to society. Uh-huh, I mumbled, eyes glued to the screen. I'd officially checked out of the conversation. My allegiance lay with Miss Pac-Man. Pandora! Jack yelled, stepped in front of me, and unplugged the joystick from the console. I watched in horror as Miss Pac-Man slipped out of my expert control and into the clutches of a red ghost. I hissed and was on my feet in a flash, my fangs extended in anger. Jack stood his ground. I won't let my baby sister sit around rotting. Why not? That's exactly what I let you do, I said, but Jack didn't even crack a smile. What was his problem? Did he break up with another 48-hour girlfriend? What's the big deal? I asked angrily. It's not like I'm growing old or anything. Wow, so this is what you want to do with eternity. You like playing video games just as much as I do. Yeah, I enjoy them, but unlike you, I'm not addicted, he yelled, throwing the controller down for emphasis. Drop dead, I spat at him. In an instant, Jack was on the floor in a decrepit heap. I needed to find a better way to tell him off. This alive again, dead again thing was a bit irritating. Get up, I said, groaning tiresomely. A moment later, he was up and looming over me. That is getting real old. Tell me about it. So, back to the topic at hand, I continued, hoping to distract him from the rug burn blossoming into angry welts on his face. Say I get a job. What kind of job will I find, dear brother? What with my allergy to the sun and all? I could be a late-night taxi driver. Maybe I could strip at a nightclub. Perhaps the midnight shift at the convenience store is a good choice. A place where I'll likely be robbed or shot, or both. Not like it would kill you. Oh, thanks, I rolled my eyes. That won't look suspicious, surviving a shotgun blast to the abdomen. I don't care what you decide to do, as long as it gets you out of the house. You're wearing a spot in the couch. You know, I think I'm pretty useful around here. I keep you alive, after all. Which you wouldn't have to do if you hadn't killed me in the first place. Not this argument again. It was an accident and you know it. I felt so bad about it I developed an eating disorder, I screamed at him. Don't put that on me, he yelled back. We fought like this until he fell dead 2 more times, and I agreed to search the want ads for a non-cashier position. I wasn't good at it anyway. My money trays were always off, plus or minus at the end of the day, despite my best efforts. I'd gotten used to the strong smell of blood, and I was reasonably sure that I could act human long enough to hold down a job. Now that I wouldn't be spending so much time with Remy, perhaps a job could be a good functional alternative to video games. Dancing in the dimly lit bar, I glanced at my watch. It was 2:00 in the morning, and we'd been listening to the same song all night. It was so boring I could hardly stand it. I scowled at my dance partner. I was stuck with a Flock of Seagulls reject, complete with feathered hair and bad dance moves. Of course, I didn't look much better with my fluffed-out side ponytail and primary red off-the-shoulder dress, complete, of course, with purple pumps and giant hoop earrings. It reminded me of the outfit I'd been shot in, the one Rosetta had picked out for me, the one now tattered and covered in blood hanging in Remy's closet. I don't know why I hung on to the thing. For some reason, I just couldn't throw it away. Not like Rosetta would want it back. If she were still talking to me, that is. The music grew louder. We'd been at this for the better part of the night. If I were still human, my feet would have been killing me. Flock of Seagulls, however, was very human, and that didn't seem to slow him down one bit. At first, I thought he was having an epileptic fit, but after the first hour, I finally realized he was trying to dance. Almost as impressive as his stamina was his ability to deliver the most inane pickup lines. Did it hurt when you fell from heaven? And, if I could rearrange the alphabet, I would put you and I together, were among his favorites. By this time, he had delivered them to every female in a 20-foot radius and was starting round 2 in hopes of wearing down the weakest of the herd. God, I couldn't wait for this night to be over. We were dancing along unenthusiastically when a panicked woman rushed into the bar. She looked like a frizzed-out brunette Farrah Fawcett. The whole do was very fluffy. She pushed through a crowd of bar patrons and made her way to a payphone in the center of the room. She yelled into the receiver, trying to be heard over the music, and then finally hung up. The woman then sat at a nearby table, looking over her shoulder nervously. A blond man in a long duster eyed the fluffy-haired woman from across the bar, waiting. My dance partner gyrated next to me in an attempt to gain my attention. My nose wrinkled. He reeked of pasta salad and cocaine. I didn't have to taste his blood to know it was more vinegar and drugs than actual plasma, but it still made me hungry. Moments later, a large Austrian man with a crew cut and a trench coat entered the bar. He crushed the doorman's restraining hand to remove it from his shoulder and made his way through the crowd to the fluffy-haired woman. Pulling out a pistol, he aimed it straight at her head. The blond man's chair screeched loudly as he turned and removed a huge shotgun from beneath his tan duster. Shouldering me out of his path, I hurtled to the ground along with Flock of Seagulls, falling into a nearby table that broke easily beneath our weight. Fluffy hit the deck as the Austrian and blonde duster dude fired shot after shot at one another. People dove out of the way and ducked behind counters to avoid glass and wood shrapnel. That's when Flock of Seagulls shifted next to me, accidentally grabbing a handful of my right breast. I then accidentally launched him across the room. In doing so, however, Flock of Seagulls almost hit the big Austrian before landing in a heap on the floor. "Cut!" the director suddenly yelled from Video Village, where the producers and assistant directors watched camera monitors. I groaned. There were still another few minutes of action left in the scene. The sun would be up in a few hours, and from what I heard, they still had a bunch of stuff to blow up. "Where did that guy come from?" James, the director, yelled. He pointed angrily at Flock of Seagulls. "That wasn't your cue!" I got up and brushed off the wood pieces clinging to my outfit. I noticed a few bruises and cuts on my arms, but they were quickly healing. As far as stunt women went, I wasn't very good. Then again, I didn't really have to be, since it didn't matter if I got hurt. I just had to be careful of injuring others, like Mr. Seagulls. The huge Austrian actor groaned and started yelling something at the director. I couldn't understand what it was. The man's accent was so thick. The director seemed to understand, though, because he demanded that we take a break. Blondie perked up then, abandoning his brooding, badass demeanor and sprinting up to Video Village. Suddenly, the director was swamped with actors. "Just one more time," Blondie asked. "How do I deliver the 'come with me if you want to live' line?" I could hear Flock of Seagulls getting chewed out by the stunt coordinator. He tried to explain how he'd been launched into the actor's path, but they wouldn't hear it. It would sound a bit ridiculous if he told them a 120-pound girl had pitched him through the air like a wad of paper. I made way for the stuntmen who came to reset the table I'd crashed into, readying it for the next take, and slipped off towards the snack table, just in time to avoid the small army of hair ladies dispatched to make sure we were all properly primped. 2 of them hovered around Fluffy, spraying and teasing her hair until you could hardly see through the halo of aerosol. I snatched a red vine from the craft service table and gnawed on it. I couldn't help it. Of course, the consistency immediately sucked, but I still liked the taste of red licorice. And it was free. My call time had been 6 p.m. Now that it was 2 a.m., we were already at the 8-hour mark, but there was still more to go. Of course, I hadn't brought anything to read. Classic newbie mistake. I felt like I would go insane. I'd been excited to work on a movie. It was a low-budget, simply titled sci-fi action project, though later it would be named The Terminator. When the craft service lady announced the hot snack to be served, I quickly realized that I was hungry. I could feel my fangs poking at my lower lip, and it wasn't chicken I was suddenly starved for. "D!" Flock of Seagulls suddenly yelled, heading my way. I pushed through the wall of extras lined up for food, which wasn't easy. I got the distinct impression they would have trampled their own grandmother to be first in line. Quickly, I made a beeline for the back door. Escaping through the back exit, I came upon an assortment of crew guys smoking in a thin alley. I sighed. It looked like my own little buffet. What was I in the mood for this evening? Mexican? No, too spicy. Italian? No, too rich. American? Ah, there we go. I smiled at a sturdy-looking grip. Good old meat and potatoes, East Coast descended American. My favorite. They all hushed as I walked by. Without even noticing, I straightened up and swung my hips as I walked by, catching the grip's eyes. He was a tall man in his 40s with long brown hair and a scruffy beard. Hello, Grizzly Adams. He He was better looking and more hygienic than his buddies, which was a bonus. Not that it made any difference in his blood. I just like my meals to be clean. I kept eye contact, walking slowly by. When his eyes widened and a smile crested his lips, I knew he was mine. I kept walking, cleared the grip truck, and turned down another alley. I heard the telltale hooting from the other grips, encouraging Grizzly to follow. I couldn't wait to eat, but I knew I had to make this quick. Our break wouldn't be very long. No time for idle chit-chat. I walked further into the narrow alleyway and waited. Moments later, Grizzly came along wearing a bright grin. I could smell his excitement. He was curious about what I wanted from him. We locked eyes, and he walked straight into my grasp. Remy told me I'd be a natural, since he was my maker. I thought he sounded a little full of himself, but apparently the strength of the maker transferred to the tyro. He seemed to have been right in this instance. I had yet to have any difficulty getting food. Aside from my own shyness about it, that is. Grizzly leaned against the wall and lowered his face to mine. His eyes dilated, caught in the vampire tractor beam of my pheromones. I focused on his neck and could feel his blood quickening. Unfortunately, he was a little dirtier than I had anticipated. I contemplated his wrist, but being a grip, basically a set mechanic, I knew his hands would be perma-dirty with oil and grease that even a thorough scrubbing wouldn't fully remove. I sighed, went for the neck, and pierced his scruffy flesh. His blood took a little coaxing, but soon began to flow, warming me all over as I drank. The man's blood tasted bold, rich, and the beard added a little texture. I took a little more than a pint, no more than your average blood donation, and was full. I pulled back to see Grizzly with the biggest grin I'd ever seen. I smiled and watched as little wounds on his neck began to heal before my eyes. Thank you, magic saliva. In a daze, he headed back up the alley to his friends, the guys hooting at his apparent victory. They asked him what happened, but he just kept smiling, so they assumed the best. Grizzly was filled with euphoric sensations. He didn't know what happened, he just knew he felt good. I looked at my swatch, one of Rosetta's few accessories that had survived my turning. 5 minutes left on break. Feeling satisfied, I straightened up, licked a stray drop of blood from my fangs, and headed towards the mouth of the alley. I was proud of myself. My first day at work, and my meal was flawless. I think Remy would have approved. With a sigh, I made my way back to set. I was nearly to the end of the alley when I felt a strange presence, an ominous one. I saw something out of the corner of my eye and turned to find a black hooded figure watching me from a rooftop. Though the strange figure was small, I could sense its power. I felt dizzy with it, disconnected. I narrowed my eyes and smelled the air. I got a faintly sour ginger root scent. Was it another hunter? Were they following me, or did they really just watch every vampire feed? It was then that another sense caught me. However, it wasn't my vampire senses. It was my necromancer senses. I hadn't had much cause to use it in the last several months other than arguing with my brother and playing with Mucifer, but it was certainly flaring up now. I stared up at the figure, reaching out with my sense, when I suddenly felt 3 more presences. I turned and looked to the mouth of the thin alley to find 3 men blocking my way. My blood ran cold. They were there for me, and they meant me harm. I panicked, trying to think of what to do. Such great timing. My very first night at work, and I was going to be late from a break because I had to kick some guys' asses. This is why I barely left my neighborhood to feed. LA supernaturals were crazy. Just then the 3 men started down the alley towards me. I stood my ground. Maybe this didn't have to end in a fight. Maybe I could talk my way out of this. Could I escape? I might be able to crawl up the building. Look, I called out to them. I don't know what you want, but I assure you, you're messing with the wrong girl. No response. I know how to defend myself, I insisted, but they didn't seem to hear me. What the hell was wrong with these guys? As they stepped into the streetlight, I saw their eyes. They lolled lifelessly in their head, and congealed blood streamed from a straight gash in their throats. They were undead, and I was no coroner, but I was pretty sure that cause of death was a slit throat. I gasped. I may be a creature of the night, but I wasn't really used to such gruesome sights. I reached out with my senses, but it was pretty obvious that these undead were being controlled by a necromancer. The horrible images from the necromancer's picture book came to mind. These guys weren't that bad, but they weren't far off. I looked up at the dark figure in the black cloak. The garment seemed to obscure their whole presence. The harder I tried to focus, the blurrier they seemed to get. With my vampiric vision, the person should have been clear as day. It had to be some kind of magic. "What do you want from me?" I yelled up at the figure. The figure just stood there. I shouldn't have expected an answer, but I was kind of hoping for one. It was then I got a sense that almost knocked me over. It was a sense I remembered from the night I died. A horrible conclusion hit me then. Was this the person who had tried to kill me on my birthday? Anger flooded me as I glared up at the cloak. The figure just turned to the 3 undead hooligans at the end of the alley. Immediately, they moved to rush me. I dodged, but one got me around the neck. They were strong, but not as strong as I was. I flipped the creatures and tried to run. That's when the 2 other got me by the arms. I pushed back, throwing all 3 of us to the ground. I reeled, catching one in the face with my fist. I stared in horror as the man's jaw dislocated. Unfortunately, it had little to no effect. The guy just turned back to me and kicked. Hard. I went flying into the nearby wall. Ow. Okay, no more Miss Nice Vampire. I righted myself and then jumped at one of the undead, tearing his arm clean off. Ew. Kicking at one of his legs, it folded in half. He tumbled but kept coming, and the other 2 were close behind. Well, I wasn't going to get anywhere like this, unless I reduced all 3 to a pile of twitching body parts. I kept that as a last resort. Not only would that take a while, it would be messy as hell. Think, Dora, think. I could figure this out. I'd sensed these guys. They were dead. I could control Jack, so maybe I could control them. The 3 grappled me again and I dodged. Well, I might as well try, because it didn't seem like these guys would let up. Concentrating on the sense of death shrouding them, I focused and saw them almost immediately waver. Bingo. I thought about their lack of life. I could feel energy there, locked inside them. It was trying to get out. Well, what the hell? Thinking of only that small part, I tried to make it expand, urging it to grow larger until it encompassed them. The strange barrier surrounded them seemed to break then, and the 3 men straightened up. I stepped back, watching as they glanced at one another in confusion. What the hell? One said, and I stared at them. What had come out of their mouth was actually a wet gargle of incoherent gibberish, but somewhere in my mind I heard his words clear as day. Well, that was interesting. Guess it was finally time to talk. Why are you attacking me? I asked them then. The 3 men looked up. I don't know, said the one in the blue shirt. Who are you? The man in a red bandana asked. It told us to, the third one with the ripped jeans said helpfully. It? What it? I asked and looked up to where the dark figure had been. It was gone. I tried to sense them, to reach out for that feeling I got when the figure was around, but there was nothing. Nope, I was just left here with the 3 undead stooges. I don't know, man, Redshirt continued. One minute we were chilling by my homie's car, the next we were here. Don't be stupid, Ripped Jeans said. Someone attacked us. Yeah, Red Bandana confirmed. We were minding our own business and then this knife came out and got Hector, then it got Jose and me. Do you know who it was? I asked them. What did they want? Nah, Hector replied. It was all dark and cold until we saw you. No one has anything to add? I insisted. I'm sure there was a better way to interrogate them, but I could sense that they were telling the truth. They didn't know anything. Okay, well, I said awkwardly, not knowing what to tell the 3 guys. I have to get back to work. You can go now, or whatever. As soon as the words came out of my mouth, the 3 men fell to the ground in a lifeless heap. I jumped back in surprise. It was just like when I told Jack to drop dead, or got rid of the rats in the library. A shiver of unease ran down my spine then. What the hell just happened? I needed to talk to Remy. I wanted to finish work, but I was pretty sure that the person that tried to kill me all those years ago had just tried it again. Oh well. There went that paycheck. I sped down the 101 to Remy's exit, hoping I could get to his house before the sun crested the horizon. Thank goodness for tinted windows. I was really hurting now, but it was nothing compared to being in direct sunlight. Racing down the winding roads of Silver Lake, I finally pulled into the covered carport, left the shelter of my Pontiac, and slipped my keys into the lock on the back door. Inside, it was dark, cool, and refreshing. All of the windows in Remy's house were covered with heavy drapes. I could still feel the sun's presence, but the cool darkness made me comfortable. I was definitely feeling weaker than usual, likely because of my fight in the alley. It was early, so I knew Remy would already be in bed. I needed to see him, needed to talk to him, needed to touch him. I shook my head, surprised at myself. Was I starting to give in to bloodlust again? Even with the fight, I should have been fine. I made my way toward his room, gazing at his always immaculate home as I went. How someone from the Roman era, when they barely had plumbing or disinfectants, could be such a neat freak was beyond me. I was exhausted, but our talk couldn't wait until tomorrow. Slowly, I cracked open the door to his room. My breath hitched as I felt him stir. Trying to ignore my quickly beating heart, I approached the bed on nearly silent feet. I saw him then, sitting up. "I heard you," he called, sounding a little guilty for reading my mind without permission. I sighed and sat gingerly on the edge of the bed next to him. "Well, I'm sure you already picked up on it then. I got into a fight." Remy stiffened. "Are you all right?" I nodded. "I can only sense what you are thinking in the here and now, so no, I was not aware. But you are here, so I take it you won." "I did," I replied tensely. "But I think it was the person who shot me the night we met." Remy straightened, looking down at me in shock. "Tell me," he said fiercely. I knew he wasn't mad at me, but his intensity was intimidating. I relayed the rest of my story in as much detail as I could. I told him about their slit throats, their amnesia about attacking me, and the dark figure's disappearance. When I was done, Remy held me in his arms, quietly pondering the situation. "I should have been there," he whispered into my hair. "Remy, I was at work," I replied. "You can't watch me 24/7. "You are my responsibility," he insisted. "It is my job to protect you. I sensed your stress, but your mood had been peaking all night. I assume due to your work. It was difficult for me to ignore. Now I know I shouldn't have." "Remy, there's nothing you could have done," I told him calmly. "I'm all right. I handled it on my own." "I know," he sighed. "I am simply happy you are all right. I can feel your exhaustion. I just needed to talk to you about it. We will discuss it further tomorrow." "Sorry I woke you." "Never be sorry for that," he replied. "I am at your disposal." I couldn't help smile a little. He sounded so old-fashioned sometimes. I moved to leave, but he kept his arms around me. "Stay," he said then. I hesitated. "Relax. Sleep. You are safe now." At his words, I released a breath I didn't even know I was holding. I didn't want to be alone, and I was too tired to contemplate what sharing a bed with Remy might mean for us, so I just gave in and did as he suggested. I kicked off my shoes, removed my jacket, and relaxed back into the bed next to him. He curled up behind me, and we quickly lapsed into a sleepy silence. Remy was so warm. It was then I realized that he was so warm because he wasn't wearing clothes. My cheeks flamed. "Ever heard of pajamas?" I asked, trying to hide the longing in my voice. If I just turned toward him, his lips would be right there. "Silly puritanical society," he told me with a low chuckle. "You are all so tiresomely reserved. In my day, we slept in the open, in the nude, and no one thought any different of one another." "You think cavemen wore briefs to bed?" "Maybe some tiger skin skivvies," I snickered lightly. "We had relations when we wanted, how we wanted, and didn't feel the least bit bad about it." "Yes, well, you also used to throw up your meal so you could make room for the next portion. Things change. Welcome to the 20th century." "Those were wonderful days." He sighed reminiscently and pulled me closer, like one might a teddy bear. "Does this bother you?" he asked me then seriously. I thought about it. Nothing in me wanted him to change a single thing about this moment. "No," I replied honestly. "Good," he told me, and lightly nuzzled my neck, sending shivers down my spine. I stiffened then, wondering if this was actually going to go further. I didn't know what to do. Suddenly I felt flooded with nervous energy. "You have nothing to fear from me," he said quietly, and I relaxed a little. I wasn't afraid of him. Not really. I was more afraid of what I was feeling for him. "Relax and go to sleep," he whispered. "You had a long day at work." I couldn't help noticing the slight disgust in his voice when he said work. I snickered a little at his attitude. What is so bad about me having a job? "Pandora, I appreciate that you want to be independent. It is one of the things I love about this age. I've not seen such women since my day, but I do not like you being alone in strange parts of the city. What happened to you this evening was a prime example. I know you handled it, but if there had been more of them. Also, working in the movie industry is entirely too high profile for someone of our nature." "But it's perfect," I replied. No one remembers you and you're hardly on screen. Yes, but we have had problems with our kind in the movies before, he replied. Meg is our most famous case. She was popular back in the 1930s, when people started to notice she was not aging. The hunters made Meg fake her death and change her name. It was a stage name, thank goodness, but they might have outright killed her if she had not been of assistance to them in the past. I'm working as a stunt woman, I replied plainly. I'm little more than scenery. I can pick my jobs, and there are a lot of night shoots. You worry too much. I mean, it's either this or graveyard shifts at 7-Eleven. If money is what you need, it is not an issue, he said. What is mine is yours. I stiffened. It was bad enough he'd let me pick out a car to use. We weren't married. How could he expect me to consider his fortune mine? No, I can't, I replied, feeling terribly ungrateful. But it was just too much. What would eternity be like if I just let Remy take care of me? I'd be bored as hell. You really want to do this? He asked me seriously. I'd been fighting Jack on the issue of working for some time, but he had been right. I couldn't stay home playing games forever. Being a waste of space was not my destiny, no matter how fun it sounded. Yes, I told him, matching his tone. All right then, he replied sadly. Just please, be careful, and keep your wits about you. I know. I'll deal with it if they come at me again, and you've warned me about hunters 100 times. I'd sent in magic on a few of the crew members. Figured some hunters might be around. They always were, but if they'd noticed me, they hadn't made it known. Now that you will be out amongst people more, you will likely see more hunters. They could consider you a threat. Me? I asked doubtfully. Yes, you are my tyro, he replied plainly. You are quite powerful, especially with your sway over the dead. How would they know about that? Aside from Jack, I hadn't done anything. Of course, I wasn't counting my breaking the weird undead spell on the 3 men tonight, or Sarge and Mucifer. God, I hope they wouldn't be able to build some sort of case against me. They can sense your magic, much as you can sense theirs. This is one of the reasons I do not bring you around other supernaturals often. They could be threatened by your mere presence. Hunters are supposed to remain neutral. Notwithstanding, they can be unpredictable and have sway over the supernatural community. I tensed in his arms. What could they do? That depends on their motives. They have developed an itchy trigger finger when it comes to containing troublemakers. Containing? I asked, summoning visions of chained coffins and small sunlit cells. Is that as awful as it sounds? Yes, he replied sternly. I turned slightly to see his face. He looked troubled, like he was worried for me. I didn't want him to worry. Well, if they do contain me, at least you can always make yourself a new underling, I joked, but Remy stiffened at my words. Crap. Wrong thing to say. I shifted in his arms so I could see him better. He seemed solemn and sad, his eyes looking distant. I'm sorry, I whispered, trying to erase the sudden pain in his eyes. I turned away again. I just meant that, well, you know, you've been around for centuries. My loss wouldn't be such a big deal to you. He sighed and rested his lips on the back of my neck, making the little hairs all over my body stand on end. I have made no other vampires, save for you, he whispered into my hair. I opened my mouth to reply when the depth of his words hit me. I couldn't speak. In over 2,000 years, he hadn't made another vampire? I had always assumed I would eventually meet some spawn of his, though he had never spoken of any. Was it really because there were none? Was this why he was so protective? You mean you've been alone all these years? I asked, my heart aching for him. Until you came along, he replied, and I felt his lips pull into a little smile on my neck. Do you not remember the night you first woke in my house? I apologized to you for not having done this before, for not knowing how to proceed. I thought back to that moment and nearly laughed. I thought you meant you'd never brought a drunk girl home before. Remy shook his head. No, my Pandora. My brain kept telling me that it couldn't be true, but I could feel his honesty. Why me? Was all I could think to ask. I knew he had been there to watch me for a reason he still couldn't tell me about. That fact made me uncomfortable, but I couldn't deny being happy that he'd been there to save me. However, if he'd never made another vampire before, promising to watch me or not, he'd willingly bound himself to me forever. Why would you pick some nobody like me? Remy went still next to me. It was a moment before he finally responded. You are not some nobody, he replied softly. I certainly had no intention of turning you, but when we met, there was something there. When you were shot, I just couldn't let you go. I'd never wanted to make another, he continued. I hated my maker. She was entirely obsessed with me. Really? I asked him. He sighed heavily. She never let me leave her side, even during the day. The woman forced me to do as she pleased. The worst part was, I had asked for it. You did? I asked quietly, urging him to go on. I had wanted the change, but I had no idea what I asked, he told me. Remy's eyes grew even more distant then, as though he were trapped in the terrible memory. I was selfish and stubborn. All I wanted was eternal life, no matter the cost. The one who had given me the secret warned me against it. I had not listened. I was forced then to either serve as my maker's slave for all eternity, or find a way to separate myself from her. How? I asked, my heart hurting for him. I had to kill her. My breath hitched, and I thought about that. While I didn't like that Remy could read my mind and control me, I could never bring myself to do such a thing. So, you destroyed your maker? I asked carefully. Yes, he replied grimly. It was the only way to be rid of her. I would not have done so terrible thing if I had any other choice. There was no reasoning with the woman. When I killed her, the pain was excruciating. Like I had ripped a piece of myself away and set it afire. I felt like half a person. Until the night I met you. This was the most he'd ever revealed about his past, except for the occasional grumbling about motor cars and the quality of wine these days. It's late, he continued then. Let us sleep now. He relaxed against me then, holding me securely against him. Despite his urging, I lay awake, thinking on what he'd said. I couldn't stand being turned away from him. Hesitantly, I turned, studying his features in the dark. He stared back at me with no readable emotion. I could feel our desire and connection every bit as he did. Or at least I was pretty sure I did. It was intense, whatever I was feeling. Slowly, I brought my face up and brushed my lips against his. A burst of yearning washed through me at the contact, and I pulled back to look at him. Now there were questions in his eyes, swimming amongst a sea of longing. But he didn't speak. With a sigh, I buried my face in his shoulder and closed my eyes. I felt him relax again, and slowly, we lost ourselves in sleep.